Today, we are delving into the subject of kitchen table polyamory. Often abbreviated as KTP, this dynamic is not merely a scheduling preference or a logistical arrangement. It is a profound psychological stance on community, integration, and the permeability of love. When we speak of the kitchen table, we are invoking a powerful domestic metaphor, a space of communal sustenance, informal gathering, and shared vulnerability. Unlike parallel polyamory, where relationships run on separate tracks, never intersecting, KTP aspires to a geometry where partners and their partners, known as metamours, can comfortably inhabit the same physical and emotional ecosystem. Imagine the kitchen table not just as furniture, but as a collaborative node where the disparate threads of a polycule weave together. To embark on this journey, we must first dismantle the scarcity mindset that often governs monogamous conditioning. In a KTP dynamic, love is viewed through an expansive lens, yet this expansion requires a rigorous foundation of emotional security. We are not suggesting that everyone must be best friends, nor that every dinner must be a group affair. Rather, we are striving for a baseline of benign collaborative intent, where the presence of a metamour is not a threat to one's attachment security, but a known and integrated variable in one's life. This requires a sophisticated level of self-regulation and a willingness to humanize those who love the people we love. To navigate this terrain, we must possess a precise lexicon. In the clinical assessment of these dynamics, we identify three primary roles: the hinge, the partners, and the metamours. The hinge is the shared partner, the pivot point around whom the V structure, or constellation, turns. The psychological load on the hinge is substantial, a concept we will explore later. Then we have the metamours, the partners of one's partner. In a KTP setup, the relationship between metamours is a distinct dyad that requires its own cultivation, separate from the hinge. It is crucial to understand that a KTP dynamic does not emerge fully formed. It is constructed through intentionality. We must visualize the polycule, the entire network of connected relationships, as a mobile. If one piece moves, the entire structure shifts. In traditional dyadic relationships, we focus on the line between 2 points. Here, we must develop a systemic awareness, observing the triangular flow of energy. A healthy KTP dynamic acknowledges that while the romantic bond exists between the hinge and each partner, a social and communal bond exists between the metamours. This secondary bond can range from civil acquaintance, the garden party model, to deep familial intimacy. The failure to define these roles and the expectations attached to them is the most common precipitate of conflict in early non-monogamy. We must replace assumption with explicit agreement. We cannot discuss polyamory without grounding our understanding in attachment theory. The way we relate to a metamour is frequently a direct reflection of our primary attachment strategy. For the individual with an anxious, preoccupied attachment style, a metamour may trigger primal fears of abandonment or replacement. The kitchen table in this context can feel like a courtroom where one is being compared and found wanting. Conversely, for the dismissive, avoidant individual, the demand for integration and communal intimacy might feel like an encroaching suffocation, a threat to autonomy. The goal of a functional KTP dynamic is to leverage secure attachment to create a safe container for these anxieties. Secure attachment in polyamory does not mean the absence of insecurity. It means the presence of a reliable mechanism to soothe that insecurity. When we sit at the kitchen table with a metamour, we are engaging in exposure therapy for jealousy. We are rewriting the internal narrative that says, if they are loved, I am less loved. We are replacing it with a new cognitive schema. Love is abundant, and my connection is unique. This requires the hinge to act as a secure base, consistently signaling to each partner that their place at the table is reserved and honored. Without this reassurance, the kitchen table becomes a battlefield of subtle posturing and territoriality. The hinge is the conductor of the orchestra, and their responsibility cannot be overstated. A common failure mode in aspiring KTP arrangements is the lazy hinge, a partner who abdicates the responsibility of mediation, hoping that if they just throw everyone together, they will naturally get along. This is a recipe for disaster. The hinge must engage in active, compassionate facilitation. This involves a delicate balance between compartmentalization, honoring the privacy and uniqueness of each relationship, and integration, facilitating the flow of information and connection between metamours. The hinge acts as the emotional filter. They must be discerning about what information passes between relationships. Oversharing complaints about one partner to another is a violation of the ecosystem that poisons the well for KTP. The hinge must also model the behavior they wish to see. If they treat their partners with equity and respect in front of one another, they set the tone for the metamour dynamic. It is a role of high emotional labor, requiring advanced time management, impeccable honesty, and the ability to hold space for multiple, sometimes conflicting emotional truths simultaneously. The hinge must ensure that no partner feels like a guest in their own relationship while sitting at the collective table. In the idealized version of KTP, metamours become best friends, co-conspirators, or extended family. However, as psychologists, we must validate the full spectrum of valid connections. It is perfectly healthy for a metamour relationship to be characterized simply by warm civility and mutual respect without the pressure of deep friendship. We call this the acquaintance boundary. Forcing intimacy where there is no natural chemistry is a violation of autonomy that leads to resentment. We encourage clients to view the metamour relationship as one would view an in-law relationship. You did not choose them for their romantic compatibility with you. You are connected through a shared love for a third party. This shared ground is a powerful foundation, but it is not a mandate for intimacy. We often see new relationship energy, or NRE, bleed over, where a hinge wants everyone to love their new partner as much as they do. This pressure is counterproductive. The healthiest KTP dynamics allow the metamour bond to develop organically at its own pace, free from the coercion of the hinge's desires. It is a negotiation of comfort levels. Are we comfortable hugging? Do we text directly or go through the hinge? Do we celebrate birthdays together? These questions must be answered by the metamours themselves, distinct from the hinge. Compersion, often described as the opposite of jealousy, is the feeling of joy one experiences when seeing their partner experience joy with another. It is the holy grail of KTP, but we must be careful not to weaponize it as a standard of purity. Feeling jealousy does not mean you are failing at polyamory. It means you are human. In a kitchen table setting, the stimuli for jealousy are visceral and immediate. You might see your partner touch another's hand, hear an inside joke, or witness a look of adoration directed elsewhere. This proximity requires advanced emotional regulation tools. We teach clients to differentiate between envy, wanting what they have, and jealousy, fearing the loss of what you have. In KTP, we mitigate jealousy not by avoiding the trigger, but by demystifying the other. Often, jealousy thrives in the abstract. The monster in the closet is always scarier than the reality. When we sit with a metamour, share a meal, and see their humanity, their awkwardness, their kindness, their normality, they cease to be a mythical threat and become a person. Compersion, then, is grown in this soil of humanization. It is a muscle that strengthens as we realize that our partner's capacity to love another does not diminish their capacity to love us. Structure provides safety. In a complex network of hearts, relying on spontaneous communication is insufficient. We advocate for the implementation of formal communication protocols, such as the radar method: review, agree, discuss, action, reconnect. In a KTP dynamic, regular State of the Union meetings can be invaluable. These are safe containers where partners and metamours can voice concerns, adjust boundaries, and celebrate successes before they metastasize into resentment. One critical protocol in KTP is the establishment of check-in and check-out rituals for shared space. If a partner is coming over to the shared home for dinner, what is the protocol for arrival? What is the protocol for public displays of affection? PDA. Some polycules are comfortable with overt affection at the table. Others prefer a neutral zone approach, where PDA is minimized to ensure everyone feels included. These rules should not be implicit. They must be explicit, negotiated, and revisited. We also emphasize nonviolent communication techniques, focusing on I statements and needs rather than accusations. For example, "I feel insecure when I see you texting during our movie night" is vastly superior to "you are ignoring me for your other partner." Conflict is inevitable in human relationships, and adding more people increases the variables for friction. A specific danger in KTP is triangulation. This occurs when two people in the network use a third person to communicate their dissatisfaction or to validate their side of an argument. For instance, a metamour might complain to the hinge about the other partner's behavior, expecting the hinge to fix it. This places the hinge in an impossible position and erodes trust. We must enforce a direct address protocol. If metamour A has an issue with metamour B, they are encouraged to speak directly to metamour B rather than routing the conflict through the hinge. This is difficult. It requires courage and maturity. However, it is the only way to maintain a clean emotional ecosystem. When conflict arises, we must also examine the systemic causes. Is this really about the dirty dishes, or is it about a feeling of displacement? Is the conflict about time management, or about a perceived hierarchy? In KTP, we must also recognize veto power. The ability of one partner to end another's relationship is generally considered unethical and destructive to the network. Instead, we focus on boundaries. I cannot be in a relationship where X happens, rather than you cannot do X. We must acknowledge that kitchen table polyamory has deep roots in the LGBTQ+ community, where the concept of chosen family has long been a survival mechanism. For many queer individuals, the biological family may not be a source of support, and thus the polycule becomes the primary safety net. This historical context informs the ethos of KTP. It is about survival, solidarity, and mutual aid as much as it is about romance. When we look at diverse polycules, we must also be sensitive to power dynamics involving race, class, and gender identity. A white, cisgender male hinge with two marginalized partners must be acutely aware of the privilege he carries and how it impacts the space he holds. Are the needs of all partners being centered equally, or is the structure defaulting to the comfort of the most privileged person at the table? Furthermore, KTP allows for queer platonic relationships to flourish, deep, committed bonds that do not fit the sexual binary, but are integral to the family structure. Recognizing and honoring these non-sexual, high-intimacy connections is a hallmark of a mature polyamorous network. It diversifies the support system and reduces the pressure on any single romantic dyad to fulfill all emotional needs. Finally, we look to the horizon. How does kitchen table polyamory age? How does it endure over decades? Sustainability requires flexibility. The agreements that work for a triad in their 20s may not work for a quad in their 40s involving children, mortgages, and aging parents. We must view the polycule as a living organism that goes through seasons. There will be seasons of expansion, where new partners are welcomed and the table grows. There will be seasons of contraction or grief, where relationships end or de-escalate. A successful KTP dynamic anticipates change. It involves logistical planning. How do we handle holidays? Who is listed as the emergency contact? How do we manage finances if we cohabit? The most resilient networks are those that prioritize the well-being of the individuals over the preservation of the relationship structure itself. We conclude by reaffirming that the goal of KTP is not to create a utopia, but to build a resilient, adaptive network of love and support. It is the brave work of writing your own script for intimacy, one dinner, one conversation, and one honest moment at a time.
Thank you for joining me in this exploration. Go gently with yourselves and each other.